So I've got Daré and Aig here with me today. They're going to tell their own stories, so I'm not going to introduce them. Who am I? My name's Michael Jordaan. I think I'm only here because I live in the same beautiful valley as Delhi, and we occasionally have a lunch, and always with a lunch, very good wine, because all the good ideas in the world are conceived when one has a lot of wine and solve the world's problems. Also, just for a little bit more credibility, about a decade ago, I did run a big bank here in South Africa, but I've left all of that. I now support entrepreneurial teams who come up with solutions to problems that I care about. And in South Africa, there are about 20 of them. One of them, again, is a tiny little bank, but there's another one which is a telco, now the leading 5G telco in South Africa, called Rain. And I've seen for myself, and I've experienced how one can solve problems in the world by using businesses to do so. So, enough about me. I am going to jump into the panel every now and then. I won't be just a passive moderator. But if I can ask our two guests, maybe starting with you, to tell us just the story of who you are and how you ended up sitting on this panel today.
Thank you, Michael. I hope you can hear me. So, who is Aig? I was young then. Nigerian professional, grew up as a child in Nigeria, civil service parents, grew up at a time when the child of civil service parents in Nigeria was just like the child of civil service parents anywhere in the world. And simply because the fact that in most countries, they are sensible enough to know that you get the most capable into your civil service, so they help you build your nation. And so I had a front seat to nation building in Nigeria from the perspectives of being very humble, because you don't have a lot, but most importantly, the perspective of service and notions of deep honesty, accountability, and so on. That's the civil service that I knew as a child growing up. Anyway, fast forward, I studied law, and I decided to make a career as a banker. And if you know Nigerians, particularly Nigerians of my generation, we come from this school of thought where people may describe us as aggressive, enterprising, but really it comes out of this notion that nobody can be better than we are. That doesn't mean we're better than anybody else, but just simply that we can compete with the best on any platform anywhere in the world, in anything, be it, banking, for instance. And so my early professional aspiration was to be part of a team that would create, a great bank out of Nigeria, which I was fortunate to actually live that experience. And as I grew in confidence, that dream and that vision was to actually own and manage Africa's most respected bank. And so we looked for a bank to do it with. We bought a bank, very small Nigerian bank, in 2002, which is now, then it was, I describe it as having the capital of Aliko Dangote's credit card balance. Fast forward to today, I think it's Africa's 10th largest bank. And so when we look, if I look back, and the fact that now I wouldn't really describe it as half Standard Bank in my sights, but certainly like the fact that I'm in the company of Standard Bank and view Standard Bank as competition. You understand now why I had to remove the Standard Bank wrapping. So anyway, that's where we are now. And then I stopped running the bank as CEO in December 2013, handed over my responsibility to my partner, Herbert, who is now late, and then spent the rest of my time since then on learning everything I learned as a banker. Because I felt that banking, which is essentially taking deposits, lending the deposits, and making payments, was insufficient from a financial service discipline to solve Africa's problems. So I had to learn other things: insurance, asset management, venture capital, and so on. And that's what I spent my time doing, in addition to, of course, our baby Access Bank. And I also, as I gained probably maybe more relevance, if you like, and a platform, decided to begin to work on public service to try and make Nigeria, Africa better led and better governed. So my foundation does a lot of work both in government, also with an emphasis on health. So that's me now.
So one of the things, I mean, you tried to describe Nigerian attitudes and always being the best, but that was still a very humble introduction of yourself. It's remarkably successful, very philanthropic, and we're fortunate to have you here today.
Thank you.
Daré, back to you now, and I really want you to start your story in the sleepy fishing village where you grew up and where you find yourself now.
Not in a village. I grew up in, not too far from Lagos, a city called Porto Novo, which is the capital of Benin Republic. And, maybe 200, 300 kilometers from Aig, but a lot of similarities, civil servant parents as well, father's, teacher, mom nurse. But as good Yoruba people, there was always a business. So I also grew up, selling all sort of things, supporting my mom, running her honey business that she's still running up to today. And I was lucky enough to realize the dream of many young people back then and still today, which is to leave. So when you finish high school in many of African cities, all you want is to leave. And I got a scholarship to leave and initially to go to Morocco, where I spent a couple of years studying math and physics, then eventually to France, where I studied telecommunication engineering. I was lucky enough that the year I was graduating was the peak of the internet, so 99. And if you remember, if you could spell internet back then, you got a job. So I was privileged to go onto that wave. But until there was always the calling that there must be something bigger. I spent a lot of years working as a consultant in the telecom and media sector for PricewaterhouseCoopers out of Paris. And, at some point, the slides and the PowerPoint decks and trying to make, 10% more for this or 2% less here was no longer inspiring. So like many people back then who, again, you don't know what you want to do when you grow up, you try consulting and then you do an MBA. So I did exactly that. And something happened during my year at MBA was two things actually happened. One, there was an article in the Financial Times that talked about something called MTN banking. And I see Mr. Jacomari is with us today. It talked about this JV between MTN and Standard Bank to move banking onto phone. And the penny dropped for me at that point because having been in Benin, having traveled the world, I've been at that point at both sides of money transfer. And I've known how complicated this can be. And the engineer in me saw immediately that, yes, if you find a way to move data, if we can move information, of course we can move money. And it's just a question of how long it will take, what it will take, but this idea in itself has legs. Not far after that, Trevor Manuel came on campus, former finance minister of South Africa, gave a beautiful speech, took all the African students, all 13 of us out of 500, back then for dinner in Paris, and told us how we should come to South Africa to rebuild Africa from here. And all 13 of us actually came. So that's how I came to South Africa. I work for MTN. Some of my colleagues joined the budget office with Trevor Manuel at that time. Some of the people went to SAB and so on and so forth. But I joined MTN, and then my journey in payment began first. Because first of all, MTN did not hire me for MTN banking. They just hired me for general strategy work. But my heart was always in this. And the vision for me, the thing I saw that was just the dramatic imbalance that is still in the world, depending on where you're born, So, and I would think that's probably one of the biggest determinants of what happened to your trajectory in life. And, especially if you're born in a small country like mine, and you can see the bigger country on the other side, which is Nigeria. And we were discussing earlier, if you take two people with the same idea, But one in Benin and the other one in Nigeria, I will argue the idea in Nigeria is more valuable because the market is just bigger. And the reality of our continent is, except Nigeria, South Africa, Egypt, if we argue a lot, I don't know if there are Kenyans in the room, they always try to put themselves in there. They always try to. But everything else is actually subscale. And for me, we have been able to actually merge market when it comes to communication to the point where borders don't matter. We are making progress to do that when it comes to transportation with some successes. You know, we can fly and it's getting better, we can drive and so on. We need to be able to make borders matter less when it comes to payment. And that has been the work of my life. So since then, 2 years in MTN to build what was MTN Mobile Money. Then I left to start what was then MFS Africa, now Onafriq, with the view to actually create that interoperability across the continent. And now we present in about 40 countries across Africa. We connect about 500 million mobile wallets and every day facilitate millions of transactions between them. But since then, we've also been able to connect this to the rest of the world. So we are able to do transactions between Africa and the rest of the world as much as we do within Africa.
Thank you very much for that. So just to bring it back to the theme, if more than 1 billion people in Africa living in 54 countries, I think that's the latest count. I never know with Sudan having cut, whether it's 55 or 54, can more easily transact with each other. That will foster easier economic growth and lead to the conclusion that we all want. So we have a large bank, large and growing bank, plus venture capitalists, plus insurance, plus philanthropy, plus someone connecting all of it all together. And we're going to get to some solutions later, but I wanted to first focus on problems, if we may. And I'd like both of you to just tell me what were the biggest problems that you encountered in your journey to, success now. Obviously, you want to achieve a lot more, but what were the biggest problems that you encountered? Starting with you.
Okay. Because we are in Africa, and I like to look at life from first principles and simple concepts, everything I do in life. And in coming up with a thesis around how do you grow a country from an economic sense, okay? Economic productivity is the output of individuals and companies. You sum total everything. Government is only relevant if government is acting as a company, as a business, okay? Mm-hmm. Now, the reality of the citizens of every country from an economic standpoint is that you can only be as prosperous or as successful as your national economic ecosystem allows you to be, okay? Mm-hmm. And when you think about migration, which is the mega trend of the 20th century and maybe continuing to a certain degree in the 21st century, when you see people trying to escape Africa, okay, it's really all about trying to get into another ecosystem where it's easier for you to live as a human being and to pursue your economic dreams, okay? It's as simple as that. So I like to think about economies like this. When you see every individual who acts like a business in any economy, they're going to fall into one of these animal types: mice, dogs, ponies, gazelles, unicorns, and elephants. I mean, you have run an elephant, and Jacko has run an elephant in the banks that you've run. But let me also now give character to these things, okay? So the mice will literally be every micro SME you can think about. Anybody who just starts a business and is existing to some degree in providing value through that business. The dog is going to be any of the categories I've spoken about, not including the mice, that just doesn't make it, okay? And so a dog is a dog because it fails, okay? A pony are in the world, maybe a billion or so small enterprises, almost getting to medium enterprises that you see in the world. Sometimes they last for second, third, fourth generation, particularly in Europe, not in Africa, particularly in Europe, okay? So if you look at Germany, in particular, the strength of Germany is actually this multi-generational, medium enterprise reality that they have. Now, what are the gazelles? The gazelles are the fastest growing companies that are adding value in such a significant way, okay, that they actually transform the economic performance of nations, okay? And they tend to be service, maybe technology, and they define a lot about the economic competitiveness of nations. And gazelles could become unicorns, and that's when they become famous, okay? And if you're a unicorn long enough, all right, then you become an elephant, okay? So, what countries have learned is that if you are very good at producing gazelles, very, very good at producing gazelles, okay, you become competitive as a nation vis-a-vis other nations. And when you see the transformation of countries from less developed to emerging and then to maybe advanced in the last 30 years, all those countries have been very good at producing gazelles. India, China, Israel, and so on, okay? And this, mind you, is not something that became was understood by emerging economies first. Actually, in the US, Europe, in France definitely, Germany definitely, there are studies in the US going back to the 50s where the US Congress actually built up what you understand to be startup America. So Silicon Valley is not a mistake. And when we have professors and academics sitting on this stage and telling us about their lives and their realities and how to translate their knowledge, okay, into opportunity to save lives and in the process create economic value, okay, when countries understand that, okay, they are on the road to, solving big problems, okay. Now, I've given that background for you to see why when I sat down and I spoke about leadership and I spoke about governance, Africa's problem can be solved by Africans. Indeed, actually, probably, we won't be able to solve our problems until we can create that type of economic value, okay, through gazelles that may become unicorns, that may stay gazelles, in quantities of thousands, okay? Right now, we have 500 companies in Africa that do $1 billion in profit, right? There are states in the US, okay, that have more companies, okay, if you get my point, okay? And my thesis is that we've got to get serious and we've got to get Africans producing in that way. Then you will see the return of, people like him in not, tens and 20s, okay, but in hundreds.
Yeah.
I'm going to come to that, but I think it's important to lay that foundation.
Thank you very much. So, startups, a field that I definitely love, and the long-burdened entrepreneur who we don't give enough credit to, who gets things done despite everything. So, Daré, maybe you can pick up on that. It's a good handover, and some of the practical problems you've encountered. You went from a corporate to startup. What happened?
Yeah, a lot of what I said resonates. As he was speaking, I was thinking, my own journey, and I'll probably summarize it as the problem of the middle manager. Yeah. So we have many problems, but I will put the kind of 3 phases in our lifetime. So phase 1, 2010 to 2018, 2017, try not to die. Yeah. Phase 2, 2018 to 2020, 2021, matter, like just make sure that we actually stuff. And 2022 to now, I would say consolidate, really. That's kind of how we've been. And in each of them, we dealt with the problem of middle manager differently. So the first one, I would say, is the problem of the middle manager in corporate Africa and what incentive he has to actually work with you. Now, think about it. Our business, we need to stand on the shoulders of giants. We need to work with Access, MTN, Vodafone, Western Union, name it. So we ourselves, we don't face the consumer directly. We're just building a platform that will glue these people together. And we had the problem of the guy with the first fax machine. Just imagine that guy. He's not very useful, right? So at the end, your fate depends on what the middle manager of the company you face choose to do or not to do. And that sometimes translates into corruption, and I don't think we speak enough about the corruption in private sector. We tend to focus on the one in government. But it's also turned down to the motivation, the why. So I have to learn to actually connect and be able to tell the story that can move the individual and want them to move on your side. Because at the beginning, there is absolutely no reason why they should work with you like that. So that's about 7 years of our existence, where we had to really work with middle managers in corporate. Then the second phase, we have to work with middle managers in public sector. That's mostly regulators. And the problem is different. They're actually not very well equipped to deal with the things we're talking about, because we're moving fast. We're talking about technology, where they first need to understand what's going on at the macro and the balance of credit, the commercial, the trade balance. They have macro issues to deal with, and yet they also have to deal with people like us who wants to put the boundary, and we're accepting no for an answer. And again, you have to go back to why will this person actually put their heart and go out of the way to work with you? The easy way for them is to say no. They stick to the text, the laws. And in many of these countries, there was no law or regulation to actually govern what we're doing. So unsung heroes of success of many startups like ours in Africa is actually what those middle managers choose to do and not to do again. And now we're getting to the last phase, the phase where we are in, which is our own middle managers. Now we're a company of about 800 people. At 800, you are hiring strangers. Probably 200, you're probably hiring people from your network. By the time you get to that, you're hiring strangers. And again, the fragmentation comes to play. We're not in one market. We have about 12 offices across Africa. COVID came in between. So how do you build a company, a truly Pan-African company, with the right culture, with distance, between the people in this time? And that we're still grappling with. I don't think we found the answer. So I would say really the problem of the middle managers has been a constant in our journey.
So I just want to echo that. So I was in this large corporate, but it took me to get out of the corporate and try and work with it from the outside to realize exactly the point that you make about, waiting for that decision. They say the thing that kills a startup is the long maybe. Sometimes you'd be better off if they just said no, but it's that the process can be a very, very long one, and the decision-making isn't what you want. But okay, so then we've got two problems, and there may be more. The one is, how do we create more gazelles? I must say, I love the recognition that this is up to us and that we can do it. It's obviously completely possible to kind of have more of a victim mentality and to point fingers, but it's far more empowering if you say we can solve it. So how do we create more gazelles? What do we in society need to do? And then, Daré, to you more pertinently, will you please tell me how to solve the middle manager problem? Because I have no idea.
So, Michael, great question. So there are 4 things that determine the competitiveness of those from mice to elephants. 4 things. And every nation and every continent, develops this capacity to manage those 4 things to great effectiveness. That's what the business school does. It's all about. That's what the education system is meant to prepare the talent for. And then, of course, even if you think about media, you think about civil society and the contributions of all of these elements that make an enlightened society, the better it gets, the better the companies within that society are. So what are those 4 things? Talent, strategy, governance, and capital. And once you just see those things expressed in very competitive form, you see the fact that a country that hitherto was deemed to be something of not the place where you would maybe, for instance, buy your car from, becomes the country that all of us are buying our electric vehicles from, China, for example. So the speed actually with which you can change that the course of your nation, your destiny, is much shorter than we imagine. Much shorter than we imagine. Particularly if, for instance, you have the type of talent that is Africa. I think in terms of our greatest area of concern, probably governance, and not because we don't understand governance, just because we've had such a long period where we've ignored governance in private and public sector. And governance is easiest when society reinforces values. And that's why I said the role of civil society and its effect on business is probably not appreciated. The fact that when you speak to storytelling, okay, and a lot of people think that storytelling is telling stories about companies and telling stories about the individuals who have led companies. Well, that's good, but that's not really. When you think about Disney and how Walt Disney influenced the world, he was telling stories around values. There's good, there's bad, there's evil, and you watch those things and you don't know and understand the effect of those things. And so, so those four things. Now, these four things operate within an ecosystem and call that a national ecosystem. We're in South Africa. So South Africa has its own ecosystem around which people, talent, okay, strategy, capital, and governance operate. Now, government, the influence that government can have on those four things is outlandish, and that is why they are relevant. He just told a story now of, where were you when you said you met Trevor? Where were you?
In Paris.
Okay. Now, how many, was he finance minister or was he?
Finance
he was minister of finance. So imagine that you're a finance minister of a country. You go, I don't know what he was there for. Now, his priority is to take 12 Africans to dinner and influence their lives. Yeah. All of them come back. One of them is on this stage. If he hadn't done that, he probably wouldn't be back here. That's what I mean by leadership. I'm not talking politics. I'm just simply saying lead. And lead in a great way and have an effect on people. And we all know what good leadership is, and we all know what good leaders do. Okay? So when you begin to think of ecosystems addressing these four things, and doing so in a way that they become better and better at it, and when you compare them against all the nations that you compete, all nations are in competition, all 200 nations odd are in competition. We agree to live together under one constitution because we desire to beat the other nations. And our measurement of progress is how do we rank vis-a-vis those other nations, okay? And in Africa, the elites that combine to lead these nations aren't doing a good job, about it. So, sorry that I will always go back to this leadership issue, okay? We can have successes. This company becomes that elephant or that unicorn and so on. But until we address the leadership issue, right, the tide will continue to go out and take so much of what is not firmly established with it, and then we have to start again as nations. That's our problem.
And you have nearly unwittingly provided Dele with a reason for this conference, which is the stories that we need to tell, and there are good stories to be told. I want to quickly tell one, which was, I was at a dinner where Kofi Annan was opening the World Cup soccer, and he said he wishes his organization, United Nations, worked like soccer. What he meant with that is, he said when one country comes up with some proposal at the United Nations, they're so much in conflict with others, as your point, that they try and block it. Whereas in soccer, if you see the other team doing a good move, you try and learn from it and bring up your own game. So here we go, Dele. That's, I think, what we're trying to do. Yeah, I didn't want to bring it up.
Maybe
you
not.
Did.
Can I? I like the way I put it. I will go a few steps further, and maybe a little bit provocative. I will say, for Africa as a whole to make meaningful progress over the next 30, 50 years, we first need to start with the two countries that matter the most, South Africa and Nigeria. Yeah. And I'm talking sub-Saharan Africa, just to. And he talks about talent. Talent is important. Talent density is more important. What I mean by that, if we had, say, 100 talents overall, it's better we have 90 of them in the same place. because there is something that happens when talent collides, when people move, idea gets shaken. And I think South Africa, and goes back to that discussion we had with Trevor Manuel, that and South Africa was on a real good path to be that talent density place. And somewhere along the way, he lost his ways. And now we're talking about, who's from South Africa, who's not from South Africa, who can have a job. It's a real problem, and I hope people in this room can actually have an impact on that.
And we're exporting talent, right?
And
we're
we
far
are
more
exporting
likely
talent
to lose talent than to attract it.
So that's on the talent density, and I think again we just have to be realistic that it cannot happen at the same time. It's just watching on TV yesterday, it was just like a joke. All these presidents lining up to meet the China president. That's just dilutive. That just we not. And again, this idea that we can also come together in one goal and have one voice is not practical. Take it from someone who's doing business in 40 countries. And I can just see that we're not always optimizing for the same things. So if we want to be realistic, I think we have to take also a realistic goal, and we have to focus on Nigeria and South Africa. Now, leadership matters so much, is what I'm saying. So much that I think we shouldn't let, I can't remember who I was having this discussion, we couldn't let, maybe we should all vote for a South African election, not just South Africans. That's how important South Africa is. We should all vote for Nigerians' election. I can tell you, Nigerian president has an outsized influence on Benin, yet we have no say who that person is. So I think there is really something here. I think really for me, and exactly to what Aig is saying about the ecosystem, so many things, you need so many things to come right, that spatially, you have to define where you want to play. And I think South Africa and Nigeria hold the best chance to pull the continent, but that requires them, first of all, getting their act together between themselves. I mean, this story about the visas and this, it's so childish. When you compare it to what is in front of us, we're talking about achieving prosperity in our lifetime. That's what it is. How can we move people? And when that is what is at stake, I think we have to take more responsibility. And when I say South Africa, not just South African, but all of us living in South Africa, that we have a bigger responsibility because there are more resources and more possibility in this country, and so do people in Nigeria.
So there was a suggestion that George Soros made about the American election, which, by the way, is a thing you cannot escape now. You turn on the news or whatever, it's all about this election. So he said 10% of the votes in the American election should come from the rest of the world because of the importance of America. So should South Africa have 10% of the votes of Nigeria and vice versa? Would that lead to better cooperation?
One thing I do know
it won't happen, don't worry.
is something very profound that was said by Mandela. And he said this he was very pained when he said this. And his message to Nigeria, and I guess to everybody else, was that the world will only respect Africa when it respects Nigeria. And therefore, what you're saying is, when you have the advantages of size, potential for very many reasons, not rising to the full potential that you have has more costs beyond what we understand. And that's why we must speak like this. People ask, why do we speak? You speak, you think, and then you act. In Harvard Business School, about 20 years ago, and I was told by one of the conveners, a professor at HBS, I took about a third of the leadership team in Access for a 4-day boot camp. And we were talking about, the India Revolution, particularly digital public infrastructure. And we all know the story of the ADA, their digital ID system, when in 10 years, you have an ID system that 1.3 billion people are using, and it's probably the most transformational thing that any nation has achieved in the past 20 years. And I asked the question, I said, what happened? And he said, you know what? Those CEOs that you see running the FANGs or the MAGAs that are Indian. The professors, many of them in Harvard, the entrepreneurs who were either in the US or were so mobile as a result of the great companies they built out of India, do business as global citizens. They assembled in India talking like this. So imagine India in the world. And out of the debate, 12 hours of really, I mean, he didn't tell me the details of who said what, but I can imagine, okay, were agreements as they left by each of them to either work on their own using their agency and their influence, or as groups, okay, to have a big impact on India. One of the outcomes is that ID system. And so when you see Dele convene Africans in this way, okay, he's done more than his bit. I mean, my prayer, and I'm very religious, is that we will be stimulated and inspired by what he does, okay, to bring our own agency in different ways and make a change. The change is not going to come from elsewhere. It's awesome.
Once again, I find that very empowering. So make borders matter less, that it matters less where you are born. It pertains to payments, certainly the business that you do, but it's in nearly everything. If you look at how the telecommunication lines go, to phone from one African country to another often goes through Europe. Same with planes. You can't just hop from one to the other. Anyway, and all of those things are things that we can change ourselves. Now, we're going to get to audience questions in about 5 minutes. That'll be your turn. I want to ask both of you gentlemen one specific question, which I think people want to know, is how do you access capital in this market? I mean, you bought a bank. Daré, you've raised $130 million, right?
200.
Tell us how.
And I'm going to get some from Ike too. That's a problem, by the way. And I mean, any entrepreneur in the room will know. There's just not enough capital going around. But it's getting better. I think from when we started, 2010 to now, I think the ecosystem for capital has certainly gotten better. And also we are having more experienced founders, and we are having people who gone through the cycle a few times, going back, and that's always will make it better. But a few things we have to remember. Number one, capital or money flows over a relationship. So this is a room where money can flow. And that is so important because ultimately, who has access to which network, who makes the network available, a bit determine where capital comes from. And what we've seen across Africa, at least for my generation of tech investors, where we went to school, play a big role. The first capital in my company came from people I was in school with, in my MBA class. So that's one thing we have to. Then the second thing is we have to do more with pensions when it comes to.
So go to the right school is what you're saying. That's how you get capital.
If you can, yeah. If you can, that plays a big role. But the second thing, and that will continue. And I think the more, there is a network effect that kicks in there, and I think it's playing out. The second thing is the pensions. Yeah, I don't think there's nearly enough pension money going to venture capital across Africa. Here in South Africa, same in Nigeria, Uganda, and so on. And this is one this asset class that can provide outsized return, as we know. If you get all the way to the elephant that Ike is talking about. And I think there's something here to do between the bankers, the government, and the fund managers to see how do we channel it up, because this is one thing that we keep doing. Everybody, civil servant, at least in every country, are contributing, and the pensions are being there, but not being deployed. And then the third one is really ourselves as individuals. I think, at the very, very low level or the seed level, it's usually what you're doing, Michael. It's really venture, seed, angel investment, really. And I think we have to do more of that because, the context matters so much more in deploying capital. And if you are running a business in Lusaka, someone living in Lusaka is so much better placed to give you the first check than someone in Johannesburg or someone in London. So where we are in our community, I think we who have been able to, get our lives to a point where we can go on holidays every year, we can put our kids through good schools, we have a responsibility as well to start seeding those companies and play the angel role.
And Daré, if you'll allow me to just amplify that point, I mean, this is a game I love, venture capital, and apart from all the beneficial social impacts that it has to back risk-taking activities that solve problems, it is actually highly rewarding. I mean, this is a difficult thing to explain to asset managers and to institutions, that as long as you have a diversified set of investments, and as always, if it's run by the right people, you will outperform nearly every other index out there.
Absolutely.
You know, it's good financially and it's good for society.
So
how does one buy a bank? How do you go about getting that capital, if I may?
Michael, I think there are three perspectives that I will take. The first is that domestic capital mobilization is a must if you want your own companies to remain within your own economy and to add value to your economy. There is something that they say that the giver's hand is always on top. Whether you look at it from a religious standpoint or a charity standpoint and so on. And so understand that if you are taking capital from outside your economy, you are essentially saying that you are going to be dictated to by the source of that capital. Okay, that's the first statement. Okay. Now, the second statement is that building domestic capital is it's something you do forever. You start it. It starts as little drops, okay, and then becomes something else, okay? And I'll just give you an example of how you build domestic capital. Several hundreds of years ago, a company called Nomura started in Japan and recognized that the Japanese housewife seemed to have some type of savings and they didn't quite understand where from. But they kept the money at home. They didn't spend it, and it just kept growing at home. And so Nomura did something. It put outside each home and there are pictures of this thing, you know, they did this 200 years ago, or something like that. Outside each home, like a post box, okay? And they told each housewife that every day there are men from Nomura who would go across the entirety of Japan, house by house, and they would pick whatever money is there, and they would save it for you. So imagine across Japan, this simple activity. And then they started putting this money into savings instruments issued by the Japanese government, okay, and giving these women a statement. And then they started to use this money to fund, okay, the first Japanese then startups, the great companies that came, you know, subsequently, okay. And through that, they created this investing class of housewives who became, relative to their wealth and their savings, very wealthy. And this formed so you describe it as pensions, you know, and so on. But the whole notion of long-term savings is necessary. We know that South Africa is the only economy in sub-Saharan Africa that has this structured base of long-term savings, and you can see that on the effect on the South African economy, including the South, the startup environment. The final thing is this: that the institutions that Africa must build, okay, must be Nomura's. And so I have so much respect for the Standard Bank, and as an institution. And I say that we probably need, maybe for the size of Africa, population, number of countries, and so on, at least, I'm not saying, well, FMB also, but but my point is, five of the largest banks in Africa that are significant and significantly relevant in the sense that you can support national economic growth, okay, are in South Africa. Okay? So we need, and if there are 5 in South Africa, we need about 15 of your equivalents in Nigeria. So my race to build Access Bank into Standard Bank and the invitation to all other Nigerian banks to do so quickly is that if we are not of that size, okay, how are we going to provide the capital that you are seeking and you're going for?
Absolutely.
Okay. So, in a sense, we all have our roles to play. And I don't even think that we are doing that badly if I think country to country. But I think we could do so much better if we had more Trevors to inspire us and to guide us in the right way.
Absolutely.
But I like that line is we all have a role to play. There's a lot more that we can do. It isn't all government. I'm glad I asked the question to you before we met, but Access Bank has a deposit to loan ratio of 60%. So it means 60% of the deposit that they gather, they lend out again. Now that's very positive because those are loans that add to the productive capacity of the economy. And about 10 years ago, that wasn't the case. Probably not for Access Bank, but certainly not for the banking sector in Africa. All they do is they soak up deposits and give it to government, put it in government bonds, which is arguably not the most productive use of that investment. So I'm trying to make the point is that's what the banks can do as part of fostering growth. But we're now in your turn. We have 11 minutes left, and I invite you to ask any question to this esteemed panel. Thank you so much. Start over there.
That we have to build these companies or these champions. And it reminded me of this statement that you can't entrepreneur your way out of a bad policy environment, right? Daré, you spoke about the urgency for Nigeria and South Africa to get it right. I think in this room there are several venture capitalists, including myself, entrepreneurs. And the question that I'm struggling with here is, what else can we do with the agency that we have to sort of improve government capacity within our countries? Because it's very obvious that there's a cap on what we're able to achieve if our governments don't level up. What else can we do practically?
Okay. There's another convening in a few days, and I've been invited, kindly by those convening as Dele has to join in the discussion, and we're going to be talking about that a lot. I will be moderating and facilitating this very subject because in my non-profit life, that's what I've dedicated myself to doing. And so in building our theory of change, obviously if we lack good governance, and for some reason we have a surfeit of great leaders, when, by the way, we used to have a lot of them, okay, many things have gone wrong, okay? And so we took more of an evidence-based approach to addressing this issue. Why? What happened? What did we get wrong, okay? And at the end of the day, it actually boils down to an elite failure. And a very, very short-sighted, unenlightened view that somehow if you look after yourself, and if the elite construct of the nation enables you to solve your problem, right, the rest will, even if it's not solved, it's not your business, okay? And as we begin to see, all right, it is your business. And I'll give you a very simple example. If you think about power. In Nigeria, a lot of businesses thought, okay, fine. We don't have 24/7 power readily available for a number of reasons. So fine, we will become our own power producer. And so it's rational, you become your own power producer. Until you find out, okay, that becoming your own power producer essentially means that you cannot produce anything that needs power at scale. To be able to produce anything that needs power at scale, if you don't have a utility giving you 24/7 power, you have to become that utility. So in other words, okay, if you haven't put in place a system, all right, that understands power utilities and how to make power utilities work, okay, you're never going to be able to produce cars in your country. Just a simple example. So mobility ecosystems, for instance, are founded on the ability to, you must produce that which is going to provide the mobility to your citizens. You must produce essential elements of it, okay? And if you cannot, you will not have, so you will look at other countries and you will say, this is how it is. EV, alternative transport systems, this and that. And you will want it, right? And you may be a wealthy person, but you will not have it, in your own country. It's kind of the oxymoron. So how then, all right, are we going to get these things going? Some Africans are going to have to take big risks. I'll give you an example of a big risk. Aliko Dangote's investment in a refinery is a very risky investment. The size is out, it's really crazy, both in terms of the amount of money you put into it, as well as even in terms of the size of the factory. But that crazy bet, if it works, as I believe it will, is going to transform a problem that has been intractable in Nigeria and probably sub-Saharan Africa, including Benin and so on, okay, for the past 40 years. So if you look at, for instance, fuel queue issues, if you go to newspapers in 1975 in Nigeria, they are complaining of fuel queues and how do we solve the problem of fuel queues, just the same way as we are doing so in 2024. Now we have the ability, and we are looking at the future where it is possible that next year, those fuel queues will not exist anymore. And we will reset to an economic reality where all of a sudden, that thing we haven't been able to have for 40, 50 years, we have. And we can take sector after sector after sector. Now, not all things require that type of risk and that type of bet, okay, in terms of quantum. The effect on the individual could be that, so if you don't have much and you bet your $500,000 when you had, maybe $200,000, okay, like I did, with Access Bank, okay, all right, it's still, the effect if you fail, okay, is dramatic. But I think that the 21st century should be defined by Africans taking big, big risks. This is the time for big risk-taking. Now, it was a time in China 30 years ago, and they took big risks. It was a time in India 30 years ago. They took big risks, right? At this point in time, if we want to change dramatically Africa's trajectory, my view on what you said is simply big risk. Now, I'm not going to just say leave the Africans to just be jumping into frying pans and fires and so on, without having governments that inspire, without having governments that know how to create some form of safety net that may not, totally solve the problem if you fail, but at least, gives you an understanding that, your country loves you. And if it's just simply, okay, you are a woman who takes the bet and it doesn't work, and you know that your country is going to say, we love you for trying, okay, and try again. That's the kind of Africa that we need.
I love that. Take big risks.
Thank you.
Here we go. One more.
Tokumbo Ishmael. I'm an investor in people like Daré. Happy to be one of his
Were you at school
investors.
together?
No, and in fact, I wanted to address that point first. I think, yes, it's good to be in a school where you can have good network, but really on the African continent, we need to be building up the whole ecosystem. We need to start with the pipeline, education. When we look at Silicon Valley, Germany, UK, where challenge funds were started, there was also investment in the ecosystem and the pipeline around that. Sand Hill Road is an ecosystem. There's the education, investors, and the money. So I think it's good that people can go abroad, but we need more development locally. So I wanted to put that on the table. I agree with the idea about domestic investors. I'm not sure what you said. The fund managers. I picked that up when you said that. You said the fund managers need to do something. I mean, I've been speaking about this for over 20 years, and you know that we speak about that. But if we don't have the leadership that sets out the policy, the one time Nigeria wanted to do a challenge fund, anyway, that resulted in disaster, but we'll just put that aside. But I also feel the need, Ike, to say we are the elite that we have been waiting for. And as you're on the stage, not picking on you, but you are the elite that you mentioned. And at least the last 2 or 3 presidents, you've had their ear. And you talk about many policies. So what has stopped someone like you and your partners, friends, what have you, running for president or at least twisting that ear to get those policies going? And the last question is, are you building a Nomura where housewives are given the chance to bring their wealth to the table for us to grow this long-term capital?
Okay, we have 1 minute.
Yeah, well, I don't know.
You have 30 seconds. You have 30
Indeed,
seconds.
we've known each other for a while, and thanks for your support, Tukumbo. Maybe just in closing and with that question, I think the question that caller asked is an important one. What can we practically do? 2 ideas in my mind for a while. Military service, we used to have it. Why don't we have civil servant service? Why don't we have that, in your career, there is 1 or 2 years that you have to actually go and work in government? Because we know the problem is lack of talent. There's just not enough people who can work through really complicated issues. And most people talented today in Africa will not volunteer to work for government. They will go to private sector. Can we think about a way that we actually direct some of that talent, even if it's for 1 or 2 years, and to government?
Thank you very much. Thank you. I get the last words.
Thank you. So it's aligned thinking. It's one of the things that maybe you should come for this discussion in a few days. But so you're asking about me and what can I bring to the table? There, of course, the most direct thing is to go in there and lead as a public leader yourself. And as to whether I will do that, it's highly probable. When, I can't tell you. But in terms of what is the currency that I have that probably is going to get the most results quickly, other than what I'm doing. And by the way, what I'm doing is that I'm trying to, if I use Nigeria as an example, over a 25-year period starting 5 years ago, okay, make sure that of the 5,000 top leaders in public sector, half of them have been trained by my foundation at a very high level. Each person's training would probably aggregate something like maybe over the period continuously, maybe about $30,000. And that way, if we can create this alumni of Dele Olojo type inspired people, keep them together, then the odds are now stacked in terms of doing good and doing the right thing. Okay? So that is my long-term play. But there are still a lot of problems that need fixing. We can't fix all of them. But what I have also chosen to do is this. Mobilize $1 billion of private sector money, largely, for instance, mine, and like you said, friends, okay? And use it to solve some big problems in Africa as the first stack of capital. Nothing to do with, this is not impact investing or anything. I mean, if it all goes down the drain, hopefully it won't, okay? But to put in some countries, digital public infrastructure, for instance, there's a country like Nigeria, 250 million people, let's get them IDs, digital IDs in 5 years, or 4 years. Let's take Benin. Take something big in Benin that can translate into a big win for the economy. Let's fix it. So of the billion, I've gotten 300. I think I'll get the billion in place maybe in a year. We're not waiting, okay? But these are the type of big risks, okay? And if, God says that, hey, this thing is working and, basically smiles on my fortunes, okay, I'm ready to dedicate maybe 70% of all I own to that type of thing. So I think that if we do this, and I'm speaking about it openly like this, it's been on, I don't speak about it because it's not about what I'm doing. But the agency is that if we're bringing this type of resources to the table that is ours, then it's difficult for that president, okay, hearing and seeing what we're doing, to continue to mismanage resources. And that is really the thesis behind it. And if enough of the problems are being solved this way, they don't have an excuse. It may not be good enough for Tokumbo, but I think it's good enough for some.
It is good.
Thank you very much. I'm going to call it to an end there. Daré and Aig,
Thank you.
thank you very much.